Hello, listeners. My name is Lowell, and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Sherry.
Hello.
And this month we have with us Ollie Jeffrey.
Hi.
Who is the designer of Quietus and Night Rain, and a great GM, and we're very, very lucky to have you back on the program.
Oh, thank you very much. It's always lovely to be here.
Listeners, for our first segment, each of us are going to go over some of the RPGs we played in the last couple of months. And then we're going to talk in depth about one that we played on the Gauntlet calendar. So, Sherry, how was your gaming?
It was good. It was light. I'm going into, as I do the dips, I'm going into a heavy month, but this was my reaction to an earlier heavy month. I was like, oh, I shouldn't sign up for so many games. I'm exhausted. So not as many as I would like to say, still a surprising number. So off Gauntlet, I played Star Trek Adventures Express. That's a hack that is a homebrew. It's really fun. Star Trek remains comfort food for the soul when you play it as an RPG. 13th Age, my beloved dungeoneering stuff, always good. Hearts of Within Supernatural Playbooks is still being played, and we also did a playtest of Jamila Najati's new Forged in the Dark project. On Gauntlet, played the Brinkwood Legacy campaign, Veil Inheritance, and the one game that I'm going to talk about today was Star Wars Saturday's Neon City Overdrive. It's a pretty sleek, smart game about all things cyberpunk. It's by Nathan Russell of Peril, Planet Publishing, and it's a good game. I mean, it's really perfect for quick 4 sessions of cyberpunk missions. It was fun. It uses a very simple, intuitive, and tense-making dice pool system. And you've got a drive and a drive track, and as you near the end of the game, you get to roll to see if you're able to achieve your goals and go happily into the future as you'd hoped to. And because this game was Star Wars Saturdays, it was a little different. We didn't use the setting that came with the book, or at least not closely. It was all Star Wars skinned, but we still hated all the corpse. So that was essentially what I walked into. And I found that as we played the 4 sessions, what really worked for me is that because Star Wars is where I get introductions to a lot of new games, Rich just is always looking for new games that have a particular feel or theme that he wants to bring into the Star Wars world. And then he'll lean into that game, reskin it, and you get like this very different little niche part of the Star Wars universe. So Neon City Overdrive, he did one of the cities on one of the planets that was sort of the central jewel of the Tzeentch Empire. It wasn't really an empire, but it was the warlord Tzeentch's little standard city where he had set everything up. So it was that sort of glittering moment when everything was awful for everyone there. And we were going to kick some butt. That was what was going on. So that was super fun. The character creation was really easy. It was just those trademarks. So you pick out these roles for yourself, and they're just these really nice prepackaged character idea seeds. They were designed very smartly. They could be traits, places, objects, roles. So a variety of those can really flesh a character out quickly. Here's an example of one, which is called the Rev Head. It was one I chose for my character. And the edges that you choose from are called triggers until you choose them as edges. But the triggers, the things that you could choose from under this Rev Head trademark, were drive, push a machine to its limit, machine interface, drive offensive, wired reflexes, nose a shortcut, shoot while driving, repair. So right away you go, okay, these are the kind of scenes I want. These are the kind of things I want to be doing. So, I picked drive and machine interface because I was going to be tricksy. And the flaw is that if you wanted to choose a flaw from that trademark, it was like they have collateral damage, stolen vehicle, sentimental ride. There were like lots of these trademarks that were really full of those flavors of cyberpunk and scenes from cyberpunk media and things like that. So you kind of went, ooh, I want to do this. Ooh, this will be fun. And you put them together and you end up with a character, and it worked. And you were telling the GM what you wanted to be doing and what you wanted to be seeing. So the dice pool that you use to figure out how you succeed to the extent is a very smart 2-color D6 variation. So one color of your D6s are for all the positives that you can apply to a roll. Things like help from another player, one of your trademarks, and as many edges underneath that trademark that work for whatever you're trying to do, your gear, any extenuating circumstances. And then another color of D6s is used for the obstacles in your way, the difficulty that you're facing, your applicable flaws, and any conditions that you're under at the time. You roll those, and the negative dice cancel out the matching positive dice on a 1-to-1 basis. You have a few stunt points that's like a pool that you have at the beginning, and you run it down. You can use one of those stunt points to move a die up or down. But it turned out that because of the random canceling, every roll was kind of very tense-making and fun to witness. Everyone switched over to the dice roller to watch what was going on because it was like, ooh, the 6 is all going to get canceled out and everything. So we had highs and lows, and you had just enough resources to do a little manipulation that if you really wanted something to come out well, you could make it happen. So it was a lot of fun. It actually added to the fun of the game, which a lot of times you don't get with the dice rolling. So the players all got a kick out of leaning into their trademarks and the edges within those for so-called solving problems the gauntlet way, which was pretty much getting into trouble in the most interesting ways possible. But we got a lot of character out of a few short phrases. It was super, super fun to watch. And as I said, those trademarks were really well designed, so you knew what everyone was going to be gunning for to be doing.
That's one of my favourite parts of more modern character creation in role-playing design is it's not just like a list of skills, it's not just like a list of abilities. You're saying, I want to do this, and sometimes that's a bad thing. So in the PBTA version of Cult, you have the disadvantages as well as the advantages, and they're just things saying this is the horror movie I want to be in this week. So I love all that stuff. It sounds great.
I know. It's so, you go, yeah, I want to have when I'm making trouble, it's collateral damage. When I'm making trouble, I'm going to be naive when I'm talking to someone. I mean, it's super fun. And it is surprising how much mileage the players can get out of that. And because you know what the other players have asked for, you can also lean into it and help make it happen for them. So it's a really, and since there's not so many things to juggle, worked great. Worked super great. Another part of the system that it has is a thing called drives. So those are kind of like what your goals are. And there's sort of short-term goals. They're like, what's the thing you want to get achieved that will get you to the next phase of what you want to do? And it took us a little while to kind of get into it. We had to make sure that throughout the games and sessions that we were sort of doing things to achieve those goals. But as we figured out the system, we went, in the end, we're going to roll for however far along we get across our drive track. As many times as we've managed to work towards our goal, that becomes a positive set of dice for us. And the things that we haven't, the ones that we haven't done to get to it, will work against us. And you're going to roll and see if you succeed. And because you have that sort of dice matching thing going on, it's still up in the air, but your epilogue sort of depends on how you roll at the end. And that, once we understood that was happening, we were all very excited to see how things were going to turn out. There's a little bit of flexibility just where you want it. Lets you shine at what you think your character should. Stunt points and gear points are what's bringing that in. There's clever gear that you can buy. But the one thing that I was struck with is the hackers have just as much fun and are as easy to bring into the story as anyone else. A lot of times with Cyberpunk, your net hacking has all these systems that are separate, and they end up sitting there while everyone else is doing stuff. And then if the GM goes to them and stays with them, it's just them. In this thing, it was just fluid. They were in there. They were just as much a participant in everything that was going on. It was super fun.
I love the sprawl.
Yeah.
I've played it several times, and I still don't understand the net running rules. That's a failure on my part, I guess, to read it.
No, 100%. Each time I start to go to that, and I'm like, I need to do this in an easier way because it's not clicking for me.
Yeah, and going way back and kind of thematic because of Goblinization Day being a couple of days ago.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
There's a version of Shadowrun I have where I'm sure there aren't rules for hacking in it, or I just missed them or something. There's hacking characters and these characters can hack. How do I do that? Just figure it out, I guess. Maybe it's very early indie design.
I
think so. Yeah.
All I know is our hacker was in all the scenes doing stuff, kind of behind it, making things easier or harder, easier for us or harder for the foes. And they were one of the team. It was the most brought together cyberpunk solution for the hackers. So I was thrilled to see that, though I wasn't the hacker.
So very, very positive across the board.
Yeah.
Things you're less sure about?
Well, this was Star Wars Saturday, so we definitely didn't get to play the setting as written. So I know that Peril Planet Publishing has additional setting and character trademarks and expansion books. So there is a setting that we were probably missing out on. But what I saw was so clever that I imagined that the rest of the expansion books would be dynamite. The bits are so solid here that I could see it being super handy to have more if you get a group of players who want to play this beyond the first short arc. We also may not have been rolling as much as we were intended to, and this is pretty common with a Gauntlet game. We just don't roll as many times as a lot of games tend to think you're going to. So those 3 stomp points, which let you manipulate a roll, seemed plentiful, and the gear dice for rolling to get tags on gear were also generous. We still managed to mess up plenty, but we basically got to choose when we messed up, essentially. So I think if we'd been doing more rolls, it would have been a little more difficult. Like, we would have had to sit with some rolls we weren't as happy with, maybe. The other thing is the shape of the missions were loose. So we did spend time planning our approach and then ignoring the plan. But we planned it, and some people hate that. So I think we had a really good time, but if you have players that hate planning, that hate having to put the mission together themselves, I don't know if there are more mission structures in the other books. So I pretty much was concentrating on just character gen and play, not on the GM material. So I can't say much about that. The other thing is that I was playing with great players, so the shine may have been shinier on my experience, but really I do think the bones of the system were really strong and very evocative. And overall, my takeaway is that this just seemed like a really fast, clever game for getting cyberpunk on the table and letting players get in there and start chewing through the missions and the tropes as soon as they want. It was easy to get your character, and it was easy to know what you wanted to be doing. The dicing was fun. Wow. And every part of the system kind of contributes concretely to the characters being interested in and in genre. And Neon City Overdrive is available on DTRPG, so you can get a preview of how the book looks if you want. You can try the core book, and if you dig it, consider the expansions. I was really impressed with this one.
I can tell because you're banging the table more.
I know, it's important. It's emphatic.
So, Ali, you mentioned Shadowrun, and you mentioned the Sprawl. Do you have any questions, or what? As a person who's played a little bit of cyberpunk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love the title of it. I think that's important because cyberpunk it's an aesthetic as much as it's a genre. And as soon as you say Neon City Overdrive, I'm like, yes, I want to play this. I can see it working in Star Wars, actually, because the opening of Attack of the Clones has got a kind of a bit of a cyberpunk feel where you've got Anakin and Obi-Wan jumping from ship to ship. I've watched those films a lot more than I would like to, having a young child. But yeah, I can see that working. Do you think you could run Shadowrun in it? Because that's the question I have for every cyberpunk game, pretty much.
I think that there's no reason you couldn't. And if you were mad to, you could even do trademarks for the particular different races and things like that if you wanted to. But I didn't see those in the book.
Neat.
Awesome. Ali, let's come to you and tell us how your gaming has been for the last couple months.
My gaming has been good. I always have like a little chuckle to myself when I hear you on this describe your gaming months as like light, and I'm like, my God, they played so many games. There's so many games. I played like 5 games, and I feel like I haven't done anything else. So off Gauntlet, I've actually managed to reconnect with a gaming group that I used to play with years ago, and we've been playing Dragon Age.
Ooh.
Which it's like, as a system, it's fine. It's fine. But I just like the opportunity to go and do some swords and sorcery nonsense with some old friends. And we also played the playtest of Apocalypse Keys.
Oh, good.
By Jammy, it's so good. I love that. Yeah. It's real
really good.
So those are my off-Gauntlet games. On Gauntlet, I played Extreme Meat Punks Forever. Had the playtests of that, which I'll talk about later. Also played Murderous Ghosts, which is always like a fun one that I have in my pocket. I can do. I was going to say I can do Murderous Ghosts in my sleep, but at that point,
I hope not.
No, that would be horrible. And I also played the one which I'm going to talk about, which was Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
I'm so glad because, I think a year and a half ago, we talked about it when it was just in a very much sketchy playtest version. So tell us about how this went.
So I think Gauntlet podcast was actually the first place that I heard about Thirsty Sword Lesbians. And initially, I wasn't sure about it because I thought the title sounded like a little pulpy, but it's not at all. That's exactly what it's about. It's about lesbians with swords. It's about queer badasses fighting oppression, which is a theme which appeals to me greatly. It's written by April Kit Walsh on Evil Hat and Gay Spaceship, which is her imprint. So theme, very, very appealing. So you've got a mismatched group of usually lesbians, although there's rules for what if not lesbians, what if not swords. But we just went with the central conceit. The area that I took it slightly to the left on is we played it in Eberron, which is a Dungeons & Dragons setting, which has always been my favourite Dungeons & Dragons setting. But the problem is, as with a lot of great D&D stuff, is that you read it and it sounds fantastic, and then when you actually have to come and play it, you have to play it in D&D. And all of the stuff that it sets up that it's going to be about thematically doesn't matter because you're still stuck in initiative orders and missing. And if you like D&D, that's fine, but I'm not a fan. And once you've got a game which is about swordplay and flirting and intrigue and all of those things that Eberron is meant to be about, because it's meant to be this kind of like fantasy noir where you kind of got this rune technology going on, and it's meant to be all these things that trad fantasy games don't do very well. But when you have a game which is about swashbuckling and romance and fighting oppression, which is what Thirsty Sword Lesbians is all about, it just works super, super well. I can't see me playing Eberron in any other system.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because I tried some D&D in Dungeon World back in the day, back when that was still acceptable. That works, but it didn't work for this specific campaign world.
Yeah, there's so much of the, like, real classic Forgotten Realms baggage built into straight Dungeon World.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. One of the things that I loved about Thirsty Sword Lesbians is when you're fighting. So if you're having a sword fight, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're fighting. So you're fighting in the fiction, but you're not necessarily trying to harm each other. You can. That's a thing that can happen. But you can flirt whilst having a sword fight, and you're effectively engaging entice and pull strings and all the kind of the technology that's descended from Monster Hearts. And you can, whilst you're trying to figure someone out, you can figure someone else whilst sword fighting as well. That classic fight scene in The Princess Bride, where the masked man and Inigo are fighting, and I'm talking with my hands now, I'm doing sword fighting motions at the camera. They're getting to know each other through the sword fight. And that's supported really well as well. Each of the playbooks has this thing called the Truths of Heart and Sword, I think it's called. And one is an extra playbook move that comes in when you fall in love with someone, or when you're smitten with them is the term there, and you have to ask them questions. And the other one is the Truths of the Sword, which is when you're trying to figure someone out and you're doing so in a sword fight, you get to ask them extra questions which are just for your playbook. And I love that little detail. It's such a nice little, I was going to say genre thing, but another one of the things I wanted to talk about is it's not really a genre, because like PBTA is known as a really good genre emulation machine, and this is more of a tone, because there's lots of different settings within this. There's a Star Wars setting and there's a She-Ra setting. It's very much, I think the base default is the remake of She-Ra cartoon. Mm-hmm. There's a very clear influence of that, especially in the art and some of the playbooks. And I think the fact that it's tone rather than genre means you can, I think it's kind of more welcoming probably to people that don't know it as well. So if you're going to play Monster Hearts, you need to know your paranormal romance tropes. And if you're going to play The Veil, you need to know your like cerebral cyberpunk tropes. If you're going to play The Sprawl, you need to know your mission-based cyberpunk tropes. With this, you just know that our lesbian, have sword, will fight oppression. And just kind of dive into that then. It's got a player agenda as well, which I really like. Because I think that's something that I've seen in a couple of the more recent PBTA games, is because the GMs have always had agendas, but you've got the player agendas here as well, which bring the action. I think it's feel deeply and often, and it really helps you kind of get into the swing of it. Yeah, and what Sherry was saying with the players, we are spoiled for players on the Gauntlet. So the players I had were really good. they really brought out each and every one of them as well. So they fully engaged with it as well. And Donna immediately made up an NPC who I had no ideas for, and then just ended up being a main character in the plots thereafter. I had a great time with that, and can see me running that a lot more.
I'm very excited. Yeah.
I think it's got legs on the gauntlet. I've already seen like 1,000 variations. So the most notable one being a cheerleader squad that was like going to nationals and like all the rivalry there and all this. I was just like, yes, do it. But you always know that a game has hit its mark when you start seeing all the variations come up on the gauntlet calendar.
Yeah. Back in the G+ days, I remember writing down that I love swords, but I don't really love fighting games. So what I want is just a game where people have cool swords on their side, and then they make out, and then someone else write that for me. So that's fine. I don't have to do that now.
I don't know if you remember that game Lace and Steel from years ago.
I don't know.
It was from an Australian design group, and it had Paul Kidd's art.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of a fantasy swashbuckler game. And you had a deck for dueling, but then you also had a deck for flirting and the social battle stuff. So it's cool now that we've got games with a lot less trad tech that can do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a whole section on ideas for flirting in the book as well, which is really nice as well, because not everyone is going to feel comfortable actually role-playing flirting at the table. So just having a big list there is lovely. Would have done me well as a nerdy teenager reading role-playing games and not knowing to talk to people that I fancied.
So all good stuff.
Yes.
Things you're less sure about?
So one of the things I said that it's quite obviously influenced by the new... It's finished now because it came and went really quickly, but it was brilliant, burned brightly. The remake of She-Ra that they had on Netflix, which I loved. So that's good that it's got that influence because that's something I love. But it tries to do these other genres as well. So there's like, as I said, there's like a Star Wars setting and stuff like that. And when you've got playbooks like The Beast, who is the Catra playbook, and you've got the Spooky Witch, who is the Shadow Weaver playbook, and the Nature Witch, who's like the Perfumer playbook, it's like, well, these are She-Ra playbooks. I love that because I love that show. And maybe it works. I don't know. Like there's ideas for how it can work. There's like notes on it. But I think there's a core game which it will play to better. And I think it is that kind of like that swashbuckling, fantasy tinged, basically She-Ra. I think you can run an amazing Etheria game in this. And if anyone is going to run that, I want to play. So let me know. It's called Defy Disaster in this, which is the sort of the all-purpose, what would have been like Defy Danger, or when you don't have anything else to roll this one. And that gets used a lot because in a game about swashbuckling, you are going to be defying disaster like a lot. That happens a lot. And that probably came up more because I was running in Eberron. I was running quite an action-y game. There was a lot of fencing on top of airships that were mid-crashing into giant towers and stuff like that. So it was very swashbuckle-heavy. So maybe that's from me, but it did get a lot of use at the expense of some of the other moves. And I think where you have a generalised move like that, that can happen. I kind of like some games where there isn't one, where you always have to make a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So are the stats like set stats, or are they like emotions and things where you go, oh, I'm doing it this way, so I'm going to use this stat?
No, they're set stats. So you've got daring, grace, heart, wit, and spirit. It's quite... I mean, trad is the wrong word because it's definitely an indie game, but it's very solid in that way. Like, it's not doing anything especially experimental, and that's good because it's doing what it does really well. Experimental's good, and solid is good, and they're separate and lovely things by themselves. But yeah, it's stat-based, it's role-based. You're not going to find anything there that surprises you, but you are going to find a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Sherry, questions? Anything you want to add?
No, I've seen it popping up on the Gauntlet. Everyone seems to be having an awesome time, and they are proliferating the different settings that they're running it in. So it's getting a lot of play here.
It's worth mentioning that the book is gorgeous.
It's so lovely.
Evil Hat continues to knock it out of the park with their book design, their text design, and they got it out like 2 months early.
Yeah.
They delivered the Kickstarter 2 months before they said they were going to, which is unbelievable to me.
I mean, it was mostly done, I think. I mean, not undercutting that, because having it mostly done before the Kickstarter is fantastic, and you should if you can. Because the preview edition, was linked on the Kickstarter, wasn't it? And that was basically the finished game without art. I think they probably tweaked it a little. But yeah, no, that's great. That's, there's other games that I backed. Well, I'm turning 41 next week, and a game that I backed as part of my 38th birthday present still hasn't turned up. Not naming any names, but yeah.
There's a certain dark project that I backed that I continue to
That
to
came
wonder.
out, didn't it? Bits of it came out anyway. Like half came out.
Bits of it have come out. So.
Yeah.
Your overall takeaway?
I want to run it more. I want to see how it runs in different genres. It's a really well put together game. It's building on a lot of stuff that other people have done, and it's doing it really well. It's lovely. It's got a lot of polish to it. It's probably a great introduction game to PBTA because everything is done so well.
Awesome. So I'll go and talk about my games for the last couple of months. As Sherry mentioned, off Gauntlet, we did 13th Age, which is our nod to trad, and then Hearts of Wulin, and then Star Trek Adventures Express. I finally came up with another story idea. We only play it when I can come up with a show idea. Then on Gauntlet, I finished up Knights Black Agents Express and Free from the Yoke. I played Last Fleet, which I talked about last episode, some Hearts of Wulin, and then I did The Veil Inheritance and Microscope, Arcana Inaminta, which is a little Arcana Tarot game that I wrote.
Cool.
And then Kingdom 2E, the second edition of Kingdoms, Microscope and Kingdom, both by Ben Robbins. Both games I adore, some of my favorite games. The last three were in a series that I put together where we started with Microscope and we build a world in one session. And then we did the Arcana game for one session to build a little bit of a tarot for the world. And then we played 2 sessions of Kingdom in that. So Kingdom is a GM-less story game about a kingdom, basically any kind of community of, Ben says 30 plus people up to, a massive literal kingdom. In it, you play characters within that kingdom who are deciding about how the kingdom, how the community faces a crisis. And that crisis is represented by a choice that has to be made that's called a crossroad. And it gives a stark yes or no question about a choice the kingdom is going to make. Like the one we had for the first one was, are we going to allow the farmers to expand farming into this new area outside the city? Very much yes, no. Within that, players have one of 3 roles. You get to be the perspective. They're the person who gets to predict what will happen, and you actually write those predictions down, essentially basing them on, if this choice is made, this is what's going to happen. If this choice is made, this is the other thing. There's a touchstone, and their characters' feelings reflect the feelings of the populace, of the kingdom at large. So they tell us what the general people are feeling, how they're going to react to particular choices. And then there's the power, and the power can make things happen. They can jail people, they can push things in play, but then they're also the one who at the end goes, we're going to do this way. We're either going to go yes or we're going to go no. They choose that. And we can have multiple people in those roles. We had 4 players, so we always had at least one overlap. This is a revision of Ben Robbins' Kingdom. The final Kickstarter version actually just went out to the backers as I was running this. It's a game I've played a lot. I've written a bunch of Kingdom starters for it. I did an X-Men sort of Xavier's School for Mutants one. I did a Fantasy City one that was borrowed from a drama system setting. I did Ars Magica. There's a lot of examples in the book. It's a good framework, and it's one I've dug. So let me talk about what worked for me. Again, I say this coming as somebody who really loves Kingdom, and I know some people haven't. I've played with some people for whom it hasn't clicked. But in this game, I love the idea that we are players in a community facing a problem and struggling with, where do we go? How do we do this? How do we keep our own personal agenda but keep the community intact? It's the flip side of Fiasco. In Fiasco, you want to blow the world up. You want, it's a story game and you want everything to come crashing down. Here you don't. It's a game that does lend itself to adaptation. So it worked really well as a connected thing to the Microscope. I was able to pull out a little detail from the history and build our city based on it and set up a framework. It let us explore some of the things we'd done for a couple of sessions and bring those themes back. And so I think that's really good. I think Kingdom does shine best when you have some strong touchstones to play from. It was a good series of games. I should have had a map-making game in there. There were 5 Thursdays in April. I did 4 sessions. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, there's that Microvania map-making microscope game. I should have done that as another one because maps are great. Kingdom, I like the way the game is structured. I like the way that we have this focus on choices. Players call scenes. They say who's in the scene. We play that out. You can bring in a major or minor characters. Everybody has one of each. And we play that out, and then there's a reaction. And then we see if we progress towards answering the question. And we kind of keep going around doing that. It's a good setup, generally. And there's a lot of bits. I love the way that the perspective gets to make predictions. I think that's really cool. They get to set, like, okay, you think this is going to be the good choice, but here's the cost for it, or here's the benefit. So in play, a question that might be like, when you're first looking at it, it's obvious, oh, we have to go with yes. Once we start to dig into it, we start to change on it. And in fact, this last session that we did, we had that where I was certain we would go one way, and then we ended up going a very different way. Now, I say all that very much, I love Kingdom. To say that, having played it a lot, there are some things that still kind of stick with me. I think that this new edition of Kingdom cleans up a lot. One of the criticisms that had been leveled at Kingdom before is that the way it was structured, there was a lot of breaking of flow and decisions that had to be made between scenes and tracking. That's been cut down a little bit. And so it feels like it moves a little more smoothly from part to part. But there's still that moment after somebody does a scene. So let's say Sherry and I are in a scene with our major characters. After that, there's the opportunity for anybody who wasn't in the scene with their major characters to like give a 1 or 2 minute sort of reflection on what they're seeing or how they're doing it, and possibly use the power related to their role. It's a hard thing to teach. It's a hard thing to get your head around. And sometimes players will go far too long into that, and sometimes they don't. It's still a stumbling block in the game. And I'll come back to the idea of teaching in a little bit. It's a game that takes getting used to. How do I best put this? It is one of those games that if you have played it before, your experience will be significantly enhanced. Like your first session might not be the greatest because you're trying to get a handle on what all the pieces are. And this is generally a thing that I'm always a little leery of with like board games and things where session 1, but oh boy, come back for session 2. It'll be great.
I was going to say that sounds very much like my experience with most board games.
Yeah.
And this game feels very much like a board game in some ways with that precision of rules that each of the rule has. And it's hard when you go in playing to understand what the fallout from that particular set of powers that you have are.
And what exactly makes a good choice? What exactly makes a good thing that you bring to the table is hard to do. And so one of the things is that I think I'm a little bit biased because I have played it enough. I've gotten that earned experience. It's also a game that I think it's GM-less, but somebody has to be the facilitator. And the facilitator really needs to have a strong hand on the tiller. I think even with experienced people, you need somebody who goes, okay, let's go to this section. Now let's move to this. Okay, you have these options now. And I found myself very much doing that. And I found when I kind of went, okay, let me draw back from that, then there's that long pause that, of course, in an online thing, you're going, oh, silence. We're all going to die.
My hot take is that GM-less games don't really exist because someone is always doing that part of it.
Yeah.
It's not a popular take.
Now, here's the thing is, Garrett has pushed me to no longer use the term GM or game master in any of our stuff, and instead say game facilitator. And that is something I've moved towards. And I do think that this is a game that you have a facilitator. You have someone there who really helps run it. and probably takes a little bit heavier roll than most people might be comfortable with. One of the big issues is that we've got these 3 rolls. They're the only really 3 roles, 3 places in the game, and they take getting used to. You need to know what you can do with your predictions. How big a prediction can I make? What is a good prediction? As a power, what can I say? What can I declare? And a lot of people don't want to play the power because they don't like having to give orders or be an authority. So it takes at least 1 round, probably 2, before you can get a handle on what that is. And we found that our reaction between session 1 and session 2, how we played and how smooth that went, definitely changed. The crossroads themselves are the big point that you kind of need to get those right. If a crossroads is not great, it doesn't invite dynamic choices, it doesn't really draw things out, it will drag the game. And alongside this, there's a real challenge to the crossroads because you put it out there as a yes or no question. And inevitably, during play, people want to reframe the question or make choices based on that. You have to take the question as a yes or no, and then any reframing has to come in form of the predictions or add-ons. But eventually you have to say yes or no, given the way the question's written. And that's a thing that can create a little bit of friction for people. And a really good crossroads is going to create really good play. A crossroads that's less interesting, again, these are things that you learn over time playing this. All of this comes down to, this is a game that has a very hard teach. To quote, Shut Up and Sit Down, they describe everything as having particular kinds of teach. This is a game that has a hard teach. And that a lot is dependent on that. Things like, it's hard for me to say, you need to be antagonistic. The game is going to play more interesting if your characters are antagonistic to one another. That's going to generate stuff, and people don't necessarily want to start heavy that way because we have described it as a community. So there's a little bit of a reverse on what it seems like it ought to be. It's also a game that the book describes a 3 or 4 hour session and doing a couple of crossroads, and then maybe the next session you do a couple of crossroads. We got 1 crossroad done each session because if people are enjoying the drama of it, it will definitely fill the space that you allow it.
And was that over like a full 3-4 hour session?
Well, we ended up doing, in each time, we would hit that point where it's a 3 hour block, and we would get done with the crossroads at like 2.5 hours. And I'm like, okay, we have to stop. We're not going to go on to another thing. We'll do our stars and wishes here. I still love it. It's a great game. And the changes here from version 1 to this new one, they're more 1.5. Things have been tweaked. Things have been cleaned up. Things have been simplified. But if you've played the original Kingdom, you'll be able to play this with no problem. It'd be very easy to switch over. Well, listeners, we're going to move on to our second segment.
The Between is coming. The Between is a tabletop role-playing game about a group of mysterious monster hunters in Victorian-era London. These hunters learn about monsters and killers throughout the city and conduct investigations or hunts in order to neutralize them. Over time, they become aware of the plans of a criminal mastermind who is pulling the strings behind the scenes. They will eventually be forced to confront this criminal mastermind in order to save Queen and Country. The Between is directly inspired by the TV show Penny Dreadful, but also takes inspiration from British horror classics, the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, pulp-era media, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and from Hell. The Between comes with the core rules, 7 playbooks, 9 scenarios or threats, a mastermind sheet, reference sheets, and a supplement called London at Night, The Unseen. You'll be able to get The Between in PDF form via the Gauntlet Patreon in late May. Just go to patreon.com/gauntlet. The Between will be available on DriveThruRPG in June. Can you hear the footsteps in the shadows? Can you smell the metal tang of blood on the air? Can you feel the veil between worlds slipping away with each heartbeat? It's London calling.
So, listeners, for our second segment, we have our guest talk about a topic that is of interest to them, a project they're working on, a Kickstarter, an issue they want to talk about. Now, I know what you have on the table because this is tied into a Kickstarter. And Ollie, tell us about Extreme Meat Punks Forever.
Yeah. So, Extreme Meat Punks Forever is a game that we have coming out in June 1st is when the Kickstarter starts. Back in the very start of lockdown, when there was the bundle for racial justice on itch, which pretty much everyone in the indie world bought. So if you're listening to this podcast, you almost certainly have it. One of the games that was in there was Extreme Meat Punks Forever, and I saw that title and I was like, fuck yeah, I'm going to go play this. And then the tagline was 4 gay disasters on the worst road trip ever, fighting neo-Nazis in giant robots made of meat. And I was like, yes, definitely in. So I played it. I was kind of expecting something kind of light because, again, it's that kind of that pulpy title thing that I didn't necessarily give Thirsty Sword Lesbians enough credit, first of all, and I was maybe expecting something pulpy from Extreme Meat Punks Forever. And don't get me wrong, there is some ridiculous gonzo stuff going on because it's set in this place called Meat World, which is the body of a dead god which is floating through space silently screaming, and you're on it, but it's so huge that it's basically the world, except for all the technology is made of meat. I played it and laughed my ass off in a good way. It's like you've got the gonzo stuff, you've got this really dry humour, but like I also cried at the end. Like there's some really heartfelt stuff in there as well. Like even though the situation is sometimes ridiculous, you feel for the characters and you get to love these characters. So as soon as I finished playing it, I got on the email and was like, "Hi, I'm Ollie Jeffrey. I want to publish a game based on this." And Heather Flowers, who made it, was kind enough to do that, and now she is co-writing the game. So Heather is going to be handling all the lore, so we're going to have like an expanded version of Meat World, and the rule section is written by Aura Bell, who people will know from Our Radios Are Dying and The Greatest LARP of All Time, You Must Break Up With Your Werewolf Boyfriend, which you play with an actual live dog. And Aura and I have been like online friends for a while. I knew that they would be perfect for this game, just tonally. Like I know their game design is great and their sense of humour is dead on for this as well, because their sense of humour is weird and dry and kind of sexy, which is all parts of what make Meat Punks great.
What does the actual video game itself look like?
Okay, so the video game is very much in 2 parts. So there's a visual novel section where you've got characters kind of chatting to each other and you choose dialogue options, and you've got like kind of the illustrations of each other in a very kind of like, it would be a very trad style for a visual novel if some of the characters weren't. There's one character who works at a 7-Eleven, but they're also an unknowable horror with a face which is just made of static. But they're talking about like normal stuff. They're talking about their lives whilst there are murder horses and all of that going on. And then the fight sections are just like a top-down brawler. And it's very much about like positioning and usually pushing people off cliffs or into rivers and that sort of thing. It's very old school. I want to say it was Wired that said it does punk better than any other video game they can think of, because especially in the brawling sections, it's not polished, it's just raw and emotional. It's equivalent of like the 3 Blast punk song. Yeah, so there's those 2 very disparate elements which kind of mash together really beautifully, and you get one flowing into the other as well. So if you're knocked out in a fight, that ends up going back to some of the branching narrative. If you are having trouble in the branching narrative of the visual novel, then that feeds into the fight. And we wanted to kind of bring that into the tabletop version.
Oh, very cool.
So yeah, in it you play as a queer gang of punks known as Meat Punks, who all have their own meat mechs, which are these giant, like 20-foot mechs, but they're made entirely out of meat and bone, and they're super gross. That's one of the things in the rulebook. It says you have a meat mech. It's made of meat and bone. It's 20 feet tall. It's disgusting and awesome. And that kind of goes the whole way through it. And the video game goes between these sort of intense fight scenes and then these emotionally intense visual novel sections. and I really wanted to capture that. So one of the things that we worked on, and the writing on this has been done by other people, so I'm allowed to talk it up without feeling awkward, and it's really good. We've done that we have what's quite a gamified fight section. Fights will come to you because the world is full of monsters and conspiracies and way too many Nazis, quite a lot like ours. And so fights happen, and when in a fight you get conditions. The only way you can get conditions are by having scenes where you take a moment and you share a moment with another character or an NPC, and so that's where you get these kind of like emotional stuff. You get bonuses in those scenes if you fight against heteronormativity or transphobia or anything like that. So basically, if you queer the narrative, then you get to roll with bonuses. So it's kind of like, it's literally make it gay, you cowards.
Nice.
In the healing scenes, and that's how you get there. It's been a weird process because all of my other games, that Sinister Beard games, well, up until now, Sinister Beard Games has basically been me. It's literally named after my beard, because that's what you get when you come up with a design company name late at night during Game Jam in 2016. And so actually working with other people and just doing the business side of it has been really cool as well. So I've arranged for Heather and Nora to write it. They're writing that together. I'm just going to keep going on about everyone today, but one of the inspirations that I sent to Heather and Nora was the Eberron setting, and I was like, I want to make something that looks this shiny and has like this much fluff in it, because I came up from a trad background and I miss a lot of the trad stuff. I don't miss the trad rules, but I miss big splat books full of like interesting characters and cool lands that you want to go off and explore. So you read a D&D setting book and you're like, right, okay, I want to run these adventures here. And so I wanted to have that. We're producing sort of like a big glossy book that's kind of inspired by you saying about Evil Hat and how much of an effort they make with their games, and kind of inspired by that. And like the stuff that Magpie do as well, because they produce really beautiful games for indie games. So the art that we have is so cool. It's the first time we had like a full team of art. We've got a cover by Paulina Ganichow, who's done work for Marvel and Dark Horse and IDW, and that just looks awesome, which is just as well because it's the most expensive thing that I bought that I don't live in. But the rest of the art throughout is going to be good. Good? No, it's going to be fantastic. Val Halverson has done the character portraits, which are so characterful. We've already had someone cosplay as one of the example characters from the Quick Start, which was that's the dream. You want to have people cosplay as your art, don't you?
Now, are you going to be doing the layout? Because, of course, in case you don't know, Ollie did the layout for all of the early codex.
Yeah.
I was looking back at that this last week, and again, gorgeous.
Thank you.
Are you going to be doing that then?
Yes. So I'm going to be doing layout. You can already see there's a quick start already on Drive-Thru. So if you want to have layout subject to changes and stuff like that, but the gist of what it's going to look like is kind of already settled there. Yeah, so I'm going to be doing graphic design. We have the art team in. We have our fabulous writers. It's going to be this cool, weird thing that the cool, weird people are going to love. And I'm hoping that it's going to be shiny enough that also I kind of trick some cishet gamer boys browsing the shelves to play a game that's secretly about being trans, because it's also about, punching Nazis with giant robots. I'm really excited to get it out there. The play tests went well. I remember Bethany was on here, who was in one of the first play tests, and that was really helpful, because pretty much all of the what aren't you sure about was like, right, let's fix that. The new sections that we have are so good. I mean, that's what playtesting's for. But the revisions that we got afterwards, there's some really cool tech in there. Like, we have a combination of information gathering and fight move called Fuck Around and Find Out, where you can do both of those things. And if that appeals to you tonally, then that's kind of what you're getting with this. You're getting the feels, you're getting some action, you're getting to fight against people who need to be fought, you're trying to connect with people. It's about sort of found family and the queer experience, and also punching Nazis. And those are all things that I am very interested in.
They're all good things.
Sherry, questions, anything?
Is this PBTA or is this an OSR system?
Oh, right, yeah, sure. I should probably talk about that.
It's like you've said some things. I'm like, you got that move with the, fuck around and find out, which,
Yes.
sounds like the perfect PBTA move that I would want. But,
It is, yeah. It's a PBTA game. The core of, like, the interactions between characters and the talky scenes, basically. That's your standard PBTA stuff. And then when we go into the more action stuff, we have something which is scratching my trad itch, my love of superhero games with a big list of powers. So you get to build your own meat mech. Okay, yeah, so you have your corpus, your nerve, your sinew, and your viscera, and you have to choose some options, including, these are just to describe it, but like runny, viscous, oily, gurgling, painful, smells like Christmas, sulfur butter, grass-fed, and you can choose power options including excellent seasoning, thousand fingers, dominatrix synapses, and my particular favourite, the death fucker. I don't know if you may have to edit that particular name out. There's also the microwave blood squirter and the big stick what has shrapnel in it. And so we've got those options just in the quick start, and there's going to be like a full-on laundry list of them because that just speaks to my middle-aged heart in terms of role-playing design.
I think options for fighting and what your fighting looks like are the most important things when you get to it. And it's like, that is an awesome idea. And I definitely want the big stick what has shrapnel in it.
Yeah. And the fight scenes are really fun as well, actually, because they're always meant to be like the most exciting elements of a role-playing game, but sometimes they drag. Mm-hmm. When a duel starts, you start on a particular like duel stat that only turns up during that fight. And that is the number that you will roll when you try and end the fight. Now, you can try and end the fight whenever you want, but if the bad guys have pushed it back and you end up at -3, then it could go horribly wrong, or you could just kind of keep trying to affect the fight positively, but you can't end the fight until you roll basically the finish them move. The Mortal Kombat to perform a ridiculously over-the-top finishing move.
Yes.
There's an amount of tension there, so you've got to balance the risk-reward of, do I wait this out because this is going badly, or do I just try and end this now and maybe pull through miraculously, or maybe not. Maybe things go horribly wrong, because often in the video game series, which this is taking inspiration from, things go horribly wrong all the time. It's as much as it's about meat mechs and ancient forest gods and all of that malarkey, it's also about living as a queer person in a world which often doesn't want you there. Mm-hmm. And so things often go like the world will arraign against the characters. Like I said, at the end of season 1, I cried, and it's like a video game about giant meat mechs shouldn't be able to make me cry, but here we are anyway, because I love these characters, and this is awful, this thing that's happened to them.
Awesome.
Wow, I like the idea that the fight has pathos to it. That is awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about that?
So it's June 1st. It's going to be on Kickstarter. You can sign up now at meatpunksrpg.com, and that will take you straight through to the Kickstarter page. And there is a quick start, which is available for pay what you want on drive-through now. So you can get it for free. You can get the bones and the viscera and the guts of the game right now. If you want to throw me something for it, even a penny, that's good, not for the money necessarily, but just because it helps the stats on drive-through.
Oh, okay.
So that helps as well. It's just going to be really cool. You're going to have a big shiny book about a bunch of adorable characters that you're immediately going to want to hang out with forever. And go fight cryptids and forest gods and the alt-right.
Sounds amazing.
Awesome. We're going to move on to our final segment. Listeners, in our final segment, each of us talks about something which is creating joy for us right now. So, Sherry, what is giving you life?
Oh, I started playing Monster Hunter Rise, and I'm terrible at it. But I love this game so much because what it does that the other Monster Hunter games have not done is it gives me this amazingly fluid mobility throughout the game. They've just introduced things that make it so easy to traverse the environments. You now have a buddy, a palamute, which is a big dog, and you can ride this dog, and it jumps up the cliffs far more ably than you do, and it goes so fast, and it's so easy to get on the dog and then hop off and whatever you need to do. But they also give you these wire bugs, which are like sort of a constantly available rappelling hook to where, whatever height you want to go, and you just point up there and kick it off and it pulls you up there. And at first I was like, oh, this is awkward getting used to this. But once I got the controls down, you just shoot through these places so quickly, and it feels, how do you say, my heart just is so light when I'm doing that, because you can go all over. It makes it very fun. It makes everything around it so much funner. It takes a lot of the dross and the hiking and the unfun parts of the game out just by letting you move through the terrain quickly. So that's what's been giving me life.
Ollie, what is giving you life?
The thing that is literally giving me life is I've got my COVID vaccination scheduled. That is coming soon. But more metaphorically, Ryan George's pitch meetings on Screen Rant on YouTube.
Oh.
So Ryan George is a comedian. I found him on TikTok, first of all.
Oh, yes.
Where he does like the first person to do something. That's his like the first person to go camping, or the first person to climb a mountain. It's like, I'm going to go climb that. Why? Because it's there. That doesn't sound fun. And this is why I'm not doing those pitch meetings, because that was terrible when I just did that. But his versions are good. And the pitch meetings are a thing that he does for Screen Rant, which is where it's set up as a screenwriter pitching a movie to an executive. And so it's a movie that exists. So like they'll do one for Cats, or they'll do one for the Twilight Saga, for example, and just go back and forth and just telling the story of it, but at the same time pointing out the ridiculous stuff. So it's got a similar vibe to Cinema Sins, but with like actual jokes.
Yes.
Because Cinema Sins I liked at the start, but it got a bit tiresome later on. But Ryan George, these two characters that you will get into, weirdly, even though they're both him, just talking back and forth with like slightly different haircuts. And there's a lot of running jokes in it. The phrase "super easy, barely an inconvenience" comes up a lot, and my son will not stop saying that. So the worse the movie is, the better the pitch meeting is as well. So find a movie on there that you don't like the one for the Star Wars Holiday Special is probably the best, because that's awful, and he does a really good job of it.
His delivery is amazing.
It is, yeah.
So
it's just his accent and the kind of the almost like complete flatness of it works just perfectly.
So what is giving me life is another YouTube channel and a set of videos that we just kind of found by accident. There's a maker who has a channel called Studson Studio, and what he does is he builds little dioramas out of garbage. And he did the tent from the new Zelda game with the horse head on top. He's done his own house growing up as a kid, done as a Jurassic Park house. He's done a bunch of Miyazaki things. He did the bathhouse from Miyazaki, and he's eventually going to do Howl's Moving Castle. They're great. He has amazing skills, and it's not necessarily something I would want to do, but he's also very funny. Like, his comments and overlays and things are a delight. They're a joy to watch, both for what he does and how he's commenting on them. And if you like any kind of like crafting or making stuff to watch that, I'd highly recommend it.
That sounds great. I'm going to check that out.
Oh, it's
very,
dynamite.
very charming.
Listeners, that is our show. The Gauntlet Podcast is a production of The Gauntlet. We have an online gaming calendar, the Gauntlet Gaming Calendar, where folks can sign up for our sessions. If you've enjoyed this show, consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. That supports everything we do, including our big network of podcasts and our magazine codex. You can find out more about all of that at gauntlet-rpg.com. You can also reach us on Twitter at gauntletrpg or on Facebook at the gauntlet.rpg.group. We also have our next Gauntlet Community Open Gaming, which is a free online gaming event helping to onboard players who maybe haven't played online TTRPGs. That's happening at the end of June, and signups are going to happen right at the start of June. Also, please consider rating and reviewing our show. It really helps us out. That's what I'm told. So I hope it does. Sherry, thank you for joining me.
A pleasure.
And Ollie, thank you for coming on again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always lovely. This is my favourite part of like doing promo for RPGs.
Awesome. And listeners, that is our show.